everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to play with dyeing cotton yarn in an indigo vat. Specifically, we're going to talk about layering color and doing more dips into the indigo vat to intensify our color. So what am I talking about here? Indigo is a pigment that comes from a plant and it gives you the blue that you get in blue jeans. This has been used for hundreds and hundreds of years. There are even some really old fabrics dyed with indigo that still remain with color today. And the dyeing process with indigo is slightly different, well, very different from a lot of the other kettle dyeing techniques I showcase on this channel. And that's because we need to chemically alter the indigo pigment in order to dye our yarn with it. So while the indigo pigment is blue, it isn't soluble and you can't dye your yarn with it. You have to chemically reduce it, which we're gonna do in a hydrosulfite vat, and I'll talk about setting up that vat in a moment. You need to chemically reduce your indigo, which shifts the color to a yellow-green, so that way you can let it bind to your yarn. And then you'll submerge your yarn, fabric, or other fiber into the vat, wait a period of time, and then when you remove the yarn from the vat, it'll look green, but then as it's exposed to the oxygen in the air, the pigment will oxidize and become blue again. And you can repeat this process multiple times to layer on the color. Now, you could also do some other things to your indigo vat to affect the color. I believe that the length of time you have your yarn submerged in the vat can influence the color. The amount of indigo you dissolve and add to your vat in the first place can also influence the final color that you see. But one big variable that we can play with and that I'm going to show you is to dip your yarn into the vat multiple times. Before we jump into our project, let me quickly show you how we set up our vat. The Jacquard Indigo Tie-Dye Kit has all of the chemicals that you need to get started on your hydrosulfite vat. This vat is really great for dyeing cotton and other plant-based fibers. In addition to the kit, I recommend that you get a good pair of gloves that goes up to about your elbow. That's really handy because it allows you to submerge your hands into the vat further. Since we are going to be mixing some dye powders, I will be wearing a respirator mask or N95 mask while I am dissolving the dye powders into our vat. And I will be wearing safety glasses throughout the entire process. You're going to want a 5-gallon bucket with a tight fitting lid, a stick or some kind of stirring stick that can reach to the bottom of your 5-gallon bucket and scrape the sides. And then you'll want some various other containers to have on hand for while your yarn is oxidizing. All of the tools and equipment are dedicated for dyeing yarn and not used for the preparation of food. Other helpful but optional items include a hose nearby and a kettle if you want to warm up your water to help you dissolve your various powders. To set up the indigo vat, I filled my 5-gallon bucket about 2/3 of the way with water, and I added a little bit of hot water to warm things up a little bit. Then I dissolved 100 grams of soda ash in some hot water, added it to our vat and stirred. 50 grams of the reducing agent, the sodium hydrosulfite, I dissolved that in hot water, added it to the bucket, and then attempted to suspend or paste 20 grams of the pre-reduced indigo dye. But as you can see, it's not dissolving. That's why we need to reduce it. But I did at least get a lot of it wet before transferring that to the vat. And you can see that very quickly things started to turn green. I stirred everything in one direction, trying not to splash a lot, and then removed the stir stick, put the cover on, and let everything settle for 30 minutes to an hour before getting started. If you want more details on how I set up the indigo vat, go and watch Dyepot Weekly 528 for a longer form of this summary. The instructions are contained within the Indigo Tie-Dye Kit, but you can also download those for free on Jacquard Products website, so that way you can see what they recommend that you have on hand. This hydrosulfite vat that we set up is best for dyeing cotton, fabrics, fibers, other plant-based fibers. And if you want to dye wool or other animal fibers, It's not necessarily recommended because the high pH could damage those fibers. However, I have heard, I haven't tried this, that if you have a bath, say with water with a bunch of vinegar in it, to dunk your wool yarn into after, that helps sort of preserve the integrity of the fiber. But again, I haven't tested this personally, so if you want to see me do that, leave a comment down below. The yarn we are going to be dyeing today are 10-gram mini skeins of Knit Picks Simply Cotton Worsted yarn. They sell mini skeins, which are technically supposed to be samples of the different yarn bases, versus sets of minis that you can dye to create mini skein sets. And it's probably more cost effective to buy the yarn and break it down into your own minis, but you can also buy the 10-gram minis. And so this is what we're gonna use today. This yarn is 100% cotton. And I went ahead and pre-soaked it for about a week. About a week. There was an oops when I was originally setting up my Indigo Vat. And so it was about a week later when I started working on other projects. But Indigo Vats can last a really long period of time. And clearly in that little pre-soaking montage, you can see some other projects that will be either already published or coming up soon. Now, since it has been a week since I first dyed yarn in the vat, we need to reset the Indigo Vat. And we don't need to mix chemicals fresh necessarily or add anything new. If when you open up your vat, the liquid looks blue, you don't see green anymore, then you can add more of the sodium hydrosulfite or the soda ash. I'm not sure if you need to add the soda ash, but you can add more certainly of the sodium hydrosulfite and then proceed sort of like the beginning of the vat. But instead, what I'm gonna do here is just stir up the vat. We are gonna stir up, let any particles that have settled at the bottom come into contact with the other chemicals, maybe get reduced again, and then we're gonna let it sit for at least 30 minutes to let as many of those particles as possible settle down to the bottom of the vat. Because if your fabric or yarn is coming into contact with the suspended particles, you could get some less even color coverage or maybe some spotting on your fibers. But now let's go start dipping our minis. Okay, here I have a collection of some mini skeins. I think these are Simply Cotton Worsted minis. I'm gonna squeeze it out and put it in. I forget how many I have total, 7 or 8, but I plan to do multiple dips but reduce the number of minis I have each time. Okay, and I think we're not gonna do super long dips. I'm gonna squeeze and remove, and oh my gosh, just watch it change before your eyes. We're really not dripping very much. Oh, this is so cool. So cool. I don't think it's been quite 10 minutes yet. You can see we have many, many green patches on here, but I'm gonna take one of them and we're gonna set this one aside in another pan. Hopefully we'll be able to tell the difference between the different numbers of dips. Okay, and I'm gonna, I guess, give it a little bit more time before we do our second dip. So I guess that means I'm gonna take everything off and go inside. Oh man. I think it's pretty good when I can have multiple projects I'm working on at once. You know, it is handy to remove these gloves and still have something else on. Let's shift more. We're getting more and more of this like flour at the surface, but we're down one mini skein. And so what we're gonna do here is squeeze and place it in. It doesn't have to be long. We're gonna squeeze beneath the surface and release. And squeeze beneath the surface, release, wiggle it around, squeeze and remove. And this is my second dip of the vat. And so it started off darker, like almost teal. It didn't turn as bright green as what we had before, but that's okay. After dyeing a bunch of stuff to start with, I'm now gonna squeeze out more of this liquid. We're gonna need this to sit for a little while to oxidize before I do our third dip. But maybe we don't need to wait that long. I am gonna remove one of these minis, shake it out so we can expose all that to air. Let's see if I can find the other mini. I mean, maybe we see a difference now. Maybe we're out of focus. I can't tell. I'm setting those both aside. All right, let's go for number 3. We may still have some greenish areas. It's hard to tell. Definitely did not wait 10 minutes. Squeeze and into the bucket. I mean, I heard that you're supposed to do a few minutes for each dip. We're definitely not doing that much. I mean, maybe we're doing closer to 30 seconds. I don't know. It's funny because I think I expected the colors to be less saturated. So I think I thought, okay, I'm gonna squeeze, remove, set aside. Because if there were 8 separate mini skeins, I don't know that we're gonna do 8 separate dips, you know? I don't think we're gonna have that much to do. But while I'm thinking about it, let's remove a mini from our little zip tie bundle. Okay, and we're gonna set it aside and give this some time to oxidize, even though we're looking very, very blue, but it might be deceiving because we've been into the vat multiple times. I have so many projects that I'm working on, and as we go in for our, I think this is our 4th dip now. Let's squeeze, go in. Please make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. As you might see, we have plans to do cake dyeing. I have other resist projects, and eventually I hope to do some full-on shibori with fabric, which I'm excited about because I've never done that in an indigo vat. Okay, squeeze out. All right, we're still greenish, but looking quite blue. Now that I'm thinking about it, let's remove one of these minis. We're gonna set that aside. Set that aside. We're still getting darker and darker, which is good. I think having multiple projects ready to go all at once, is this dip 5? I don't even know anymore. Having multiple projects ready to go all at once is definitely the way to go. But one other thing that is worth noting is that I'm doing other projects in between this one. And so each dip I go in theory, there's less and less indigo here. But this vat, in theory, could do 5 pounds of fiber. And that I think I maybe have a little over 2 pounds of yarn that I'm playing with here today. So we're still turning green. So in theory, we should still be getting darker and darker. Now, I don't have these minis labeled. So I am not gonna be able to say, just looking at them, how many dips I've done. They are looking darker and darker from where I have placed them. So that is something. But for now, I'm gonna place the lid on for a moment. We're gonna give our dip guy a squeeze. Ooh. Gonna set my other yarn cake aside. So those are together. And editing Rebecca, I'm sure, is having a ton of fun with all these projects. But as I'm over here working, probably out of focus a lot of the time, just look at the different depths that we have over here. You can clearly see across the middle that some of those skeins where we've had multiple dunks into the indigo vat are much, much more saturated. It's just that original blue feels very saturated to begin with, so that's pretty cool. Now, will there be color transfer from everything laying in a pile? That I don't know. Gotta get my gloves back on. All right, let's see. each time we go in, we got more little bits, right? Okay. It's time for our next dip. I don't know how many we have left, but let's squeeze the air out because there's not that much liquid in here. And we're going in. Is this 5? Is this 6? I've lost count. Thing with filming outside is that we can hear fun things from my neighbors. Oh, they're definitely getting darker. Who knew? Because I felt like the original, okay, I'm gonna squeeze and remove. I felt like the original was incredibly dark. So who knows if we're gonna approach something that almost feels black, or if at some point there's a limit to the depth we can get. That I don't know. I still have multiple minis left, and it doesn't look like that it took on a ton of color or anything. I'm gonna set it aside. A little worried about color transfer, but also not really. All right, I just stepped back over to squeeze this. I don't know how much darker we can go, but I'm gonna wait and come back to this in a minute. We'll set it aside because there's one other project I wanna do on yarn that I've not yet started. Of course, you can do wool-based yarns in here. It's just they recommend that you have a bath with acid that you go back to after the fact. Okay, dip 500. How many minis do I have left? Just 2. 2 minis left. Okay. Squeeze and into the vat. I have a feeling that like maybe 4 dips is enough. And I don't know if staying underwater longer really makes a difference. But, you know, it still did turn greenish. It's just very quickly, you almost can't tell anymore. Okay, but we've got our last one. I'm gonna let that sit for a little while before we come back to it. I tossed the other one aside, and well, now that we're waiting again, because I think all my projects are in a waiting mode, I'm gonna put the lid on. Okay, here's that color mist we dyed at the beginning. I do see a little purple in that lighter section. Maybe once it's dry we'll see more, but look at the difference between one dip, and I don't know if this one was our one dip or not, and then many dips. That color difference is super, super extreme. Oh my gosh. Now I don't know if the multiple dips are gonna be harder to wash. I still have one more that I need to do, but I think that it's going pretty well. It's time for our final dip, which it's unclear if this would count as an additional dip, but because I did have some like other drippings on it, so I don't know if that counts. But again, we will attempt to arrange these unlabeled minis in the order of saturation that we see, but you know, and I also don't know how much backstaining we might get, but let's squeeze and remove. It does look a hair greenish, but it's so dark that it's hard to say how many dips. Like, not how many dips, but if everything is oxidized already, because that base color is so dark that I don't think we'd see the green in there very much, except for a hint at the very beginning. I don't know how much of the washing I'm going to show of this, because I've already shown a bunch of washing in this video from that very first skein, but I will pop in if there's anything notable. And the one thing I will make sure to do once I have gloves back on again is I'm going to place all of the zip ties back onto our, what do you call it, zip tie. Dyeing in an indigo vat is super fun, but the biggest downside is the washing. Now, when I'm dyeing yarn in an indigo vat, I like to do that outside, and one perk is that I can use my hose to start with the rinsing and the washing to try to get as much of that undissolved indigo off as possible, or even, I don't know if there's some dissolved, to do my best. So I spray it with a hose. I'm washing our minis here with another skein of yarn that I dyed in the vat. And then eventually I will move all the washing indoors into my sink where I can start using hotter water and some soap. I like to use Synthropol because I find that that really is good about binding that excess dye and helping remove it from the yarn. Because whenever I add the Synthropol, the bleeding gets a lot worse, but then as I rinse it out, it gets better. And I continue doing this until the water is, it's not gonna be 100% clear, but it is a lot more clear. Now keep in mind that when you buy jeans or anything denim that has been commercially dyed with indigo, likely either synthetic indigo, similar to the kit, or even plant extracted indigo, which are the same compounds, by the way, you could get bleeding and color transfer. So it's important to keep that in mind and to have your expectations in check. But the washing here didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. And I was washing a lot of yarn for a lot of projects this day. Once I was done washing the yarn, I hung it up to dry, and now we can go look at the finished yarn. Here is the range of colors we got from doing one dip all the way to 8 different dips in the Indigo Vat. Now, from all the projects I've done, the depth of color you can get from one dip really does vary. I think that it's not necessarily important if you're dyeing at the beginning of when you set up the vat versus towards the end, but I think the length of time you have the yarn in the vat can make a difference to the final color that you see. And so actually, that could be an interesting project to do with our Indigo Vat at some point. We could take 2 skeins, do one really fast dip, one much longer dip, and see if we get a difference in the color. Because if we do the longer dip second, then it doesn't matter if, quote, more dye was used up from the first dip, because it's the second one went second. The longer one went second. And so, ooh, I am going to make a note of this. I truly love looking at gradients like this because it really does make it seem like we have a spotlight coming from this side onto the yarn. And it's only if you see the backdrop and that color is consistent that you realize, no, it's not a trick of the light. It's just we've got lighter to darker. I really need to go twist all these up, but it just looks so cool. Here are the mini skeins in sort of a random order. And then here we are in gradient order, not centered. It was a little challenging to put our darkest ones in order. I would say after 5 or 6 dips, the color change didn't make a massive difference. I mean, the difference between what I think is 5 and 8 is different for sure, but it starts to get very subtle when you move on. Now, when I set up the Indigo Vat and dyed my hand blue, this is that first skein that I dyed. I dipped this in one time. Color-wise, I'd say it's closer to what 2 dips was on these mini skeins. Now, again, I mentioned another experiment I could do. I don't know how much the fact that I dyed these minis later on in the process made a difference, but I think actually the first time the mini skeins were dipped into the Indigo Vat, that was pretty early. I hadn't dyed very much yarn yet, but I definitely didn't keep the mini skeins in for a minute or 2 each time. My dips were pretty quick, and I did not have an easy timer that I was using to keep track of how long they were in there. My only real point here is that I am a relative novice when it comes to dyeing yarn with indigo. And while I have some hypotheses and conclusions of things working and not working and how they may work, I don't have enough experience to say for sure and to answer some of these questions that I'm now posing. And so that's just a reason to play around with the vat more. Even if I exhaust this vat that I used in this video. I have more Jacquard Indigo kits so I can set up a new vat as needed. But if you want to see me play with this more, I know I have a lot of Indigo videos planned. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I post content at least twice a week, and you don't want to miss any of it. And if you love the yarn that I dye, go and check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. When you purchase yarn from me, and almost all the yarn in my shop has been featured in one of my YouTube videos, it helps me get more materials and supplies so I can continue experimenting with color and yarn in many different ways. And so I really hope that you enjoy the whole process. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.